With baseball season coming up, be sure to subscribe to Jaguar 7 to learn more about the history of Major League Baseball. We've had new videos drop in each of the past 3 days, so be sure to subscribe now so you don't miss any of the action. Click the card in the upper right corner to join. And now, on with our feature presentation. Even though the Chicago Bears won Super Bowl 20 and scored 46 points, and seemingly could do everything they wanted to against the New England Patriots, there's one thing that they didn't do. Because this man right here, head coach Mike Ditka, controversially decided on the goal line to get William Perry the ball, and to let the refrigerator score a touchdown. It meant that star running back Walter Payton, in his one and only chance at playing in the big game, never found the end zone. And even though the Bears won the game, the fact that Payton didn't score a touchdown when he absolutely could have, absolutely ate Ditka alive, and still does to this day. As Ditka said, "I realized after the game that Walter Payton didn't score. It bothered him, and because it bothered him, it bothered me. I can stand up here now and tell you the greatest regret I ever had was when Walter didn't score a touchdown in the Super Bowl." Now, the story behind that is pretty well known and documented, and it's not the first time I've talked about drama involving Mike Ditka and Walter Payton over his usage. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But I bring this up because even though this is, without a doubt, the biggest regret in Bears history, where a head coach was furious at himself for the rest of his life for not allowing his running back to do something, it wasn't even the first time in Bears history that this happened. You probably knew about that one, but you likely don't know about the one involving this man right here, Chicago Bears head coach Abe Gibron. Because in 1973, he was absolutely kicking himself for not letting one of his running backs do something, and considering what happened afterwards with that running back's career, it would eat him alive for the rest of his life. Because this is the story behind the craziest regret in the over 100-year history of the Chicago Bears franchise. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand the game that was being played, how it was going, and most importantly, who this running back was that we're focusing on here. It's September 30th, 1973. It's week 3 of the NFL season, and we have an interconference battle on our hands over in Colorado between the Chicago Bears and the Denver Broncos. For the Bears in particular, this game was absolutely critical, as they had started the season on just about the worst foot imaginable, starting 0-2. Lose this one to drop to 0-3, and even though it's not the end of September yet, you can pretty much kiss your hopes of doing anything this year goodbye, since coming back from an 0-3 start in a 14-game season when only 4 teams make the playoffs, and when the Minnesota Vikings are dominating your division, is just about impossible. Now, in fairness to the Bears, I don't think anyone expected them to start better than 0-2. Their first 2 games were against the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings, and you can learn more about that Cowboys game by clicking the card in the upper right corner. If they went 1-1, it would have been surprising. If they went 2-0, they would have been planning the Super Bowl parade. At least this Broncos game, on paper, was winnable. However, it was a must-win. There was no room for error. And if the Bears were going to prevail, then they likely needed a great performance out of this man right here, their running back, Jim Harrison. Harrison was drafted in the 2nd round of the 1971 NFL Draft out of Missouri, as the Bears decided to spend both of their top 2 picks that year on him and Joe Moore on Missouri running backs. Unfortunately, this strategy wasn't entirely working out, as midway through his 3rd year, Harrison had struggled to get much of anything going, picking up just 724 rushing yards on under 3.8 yards per carry, and he had found the end zone just 3 times. It was a pretty bad and fitting omen when in the very first regular season game he got a carry in, he finished that game, which was a 1971 contest against the Green Bay Packers, with -3 rushing yards. Always a good sign when the fans in the stands have more yards than you do. People were writing Harrison off as a bust, and understandably so. And Harrison even admitted as much, saying on the talk that he was a wasted draft pick, "I really didn't expect to be here this year. I was making some lousy mistakes." Now that's not to say that he didn't have his moments. Heck, you've been watching some of them right now on these highlights. He scored Chicago's only touchdown in a 1972 upset victory on Monday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings in a 13-10 win on national TV. He averaged over 5.6 yards per carry in the season opener in 1972 against the Atlanta Falcons. He had 100 yards from scrimmage in the season opener in 1973 against the Dallas Cowboys. At certain moments, there was absolutely something there. And if the Bears were going to win this one, they absolutely needed him to perform like he was capable of performing, and show off why he was worthy of a second-round pick near the start of the decade. Sure enough, the good news for the Bears was that after an 0-2 start, they finally got their first win of the season, as they went into Denver and destroyed the Broncos. Not once did the Bears trail at any point. They led it 16-0 at the halftime break, and led 30-0 at the end of three quarters. Literally everything positive that Denver did in this game came in garbage time, when the outcome was never in doubt whatsoever. All in all, it was just about a perfect game for the Bears, especially defensively, where they forced a whopping 7 turnovers and recovered all 5 fumbles that the Broncos put on the ground, while also forcing 4 sacks and holding Floyd Little, a future Hall of Fame running back and one of the best runners in all of football at the time, to just 42 yards rushing on barely over 3 yards per carry. It was Chicago's biggest road win in terms of scoring margin since the season finale against the New Orleans Saints in 1970. And considering the circumstances and their 0-2 start, it could not have come at a better time. And while there were many reasons why the Bears won this game, if there had to be an MVP from this game, it was none other than the man of the hour, Jim Harrison. There are certain players where it is extremely easy to pinpoint what their best ever game as a pro was. And for Harrison, it was easily this game against the Broncos. He was slicing and dicing Denver all day long, and for the first time in his career, scored multiple touchdowns in the same game. He had 2 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown, scoring the first touchdown of the game from 44 yards out on a throw by Bobby Douglas. And he had 98 rushing yards on 5.4 yards per carry and a touchdown from 5 yards out in the third quarter to make it a 5-possession game and put it beyond any reasonable doubt at all. In total, Harrison had 159 yards from scrimmage. For some perspective on how great that is, here's a look at every game that Harrison played up until that point, which is a stretch from week 13 of 1971 until this game in 1973, and how many yards from scrimmage he had in each of those games. That bar on the far right in orange? That's his total from the Denver game, just towering above the rest, almost as though he was playing a different sport. Nobody could tackle him, nobody could stop him, and nobody could do anything against him. On this day, for one of the few times in his career, Jim Harrison was a force to be reckoned with. However, remember what I said about his rushing output during this game and how many yards he had? When all was said and done, he had 98 rushing yards. And what's the magic number, more than any, that every running back covets and strives to hit? 100. You hit triple figures, and you cross the 100-yard mark on the ground, and you truly made it. We look at running backs in terms of how many 100-plus yard games they have. We talk about streaks and droughts of 100-plus yard rushers. The 100-yard benchmark is ingrained in the game in a way that can't be said about any other numbers for a single game in any other position, maybe with the exception of wide receivers hitting that 100-yard mark. It's a big deal, and even though this was the game of Jim Harrison's career, he failed to hit that mark by 2 yards. That was it. But here's the thing, he absolutely could have hit the mark. The problem was that this man right here, head coach Abe Gibron, benched him and pulled him from the game in the fourth quarter after he scored the touchdown to make it 30-0. The game was over by this point, so Gibron called off the Hounds and put in the backups. letting guys play who didn't get to play a whole lot. This meant that for the fourth quarter, with the game out of reach, guys like Gary Cousins, who had no carries so far in 1973 and had 3 carries for 5 yards in 1972, were getting extended playing time. Harrison was just sitting there on the bench for the entire fourth quarter, doing absolutely nothing, and sitting at 98 rushing yards, just 2 yards away from glory, which he could easily pick up in one play. And you'd think that of all the people to know the importance of a 100-yard gain, it would be Abe Gibron, seeing as he played 11 seasons of professional football on the offensive line, blocking for running backs and whatnot. Not only is it a huge boost for a running back to hit 100 yards, but it's a huge boost for an offensive line to realize that you dominated in the trenches, and you allowed one of your players to cross that threshold, since none of that would be possible without you setting up blocks along the way. Which raises the question, why didn't Gibron let Harrison go for 100? Well, never attribute to malice what can be attributed to ignorance, because quite simply, he didn't know. Remember, this was 1973 that we were talking about. It's not as though Gibron could just look up at the scoreboard and see all the stats in real time and see that Harrison was nearing 100 yards. The scoreboard had the score and maybe some other extremely basic information, and that was it. No one relayed to him that Harrison was on 98 yards. It was only after the game that Gibron found out about this. And while Gibron was understandably excited and thrilled with his first win of the season, when he heard the news that Harrison was short of the 100-yard mark by 2 yards, and it was entirely because he did not play Harrison in the fourth quarter, the excitement quickly turned to disappointment and regret. Because Gibron was distraught and shaken over the fact that he cost his running back, who doesn't get a whole lot of chances to do this, mind you, a shot at a 100-yard gain. Gibron praised Harrison and his improvement, but then said on his 98-yard performance, "If I had known he was only 2 yards short of 100 yards, I wouldn't have pulled him. A 100-yard gain is a hell of a thing for a fullback." It killed Gibron that he yanked his guy just 2 yards shy of an all-important milestone, and one that every running back aspires to reach at some point in a game. It haunted Gibron that he just cost Harrison a chance at the moment of his life. But hey, Harrison's only midway through his 3rd season. There will be plenty of other chances to get 100-yard games and to reach this milestone, right? Well, there's a reason that you're only seeing shots of Gibron right now and not of Harrison. And that's because, quite simply, that opportunity never came again. In fact, it didn't even come close. The following week against the Saints, he had just 14 rushing yards on 13 carries, averaging just slightly over 1 yard per carry. He didn't score another rushing touchdown for the rest of 1973, and would score just one in 1974 after having his season cut short due to some ligament damage in his foot. Let's bring back that chart from before, but this time, add the 16 games that Harrison had after the Broncos game. With the exception of a 52-yard game against the Packers in Week 8 of 1973, not once did Harrison ever even eclipse 50 yards in a single game, with the bulk of these totals being 10 yards or less. Harrison never played in the NFL again after the 1974 season. He was acquired by the San Diego Chargers during the 1975 NFL Draft, but nothing came of that. And this meant that Harrison would never cross the 100-yard mark again. That Broncos game was his last chance at doing it, and his last chance at even sniffing it or being in the same zip code as it. And Abe Gibron had to live with that, and was clearly bothered by the fact that he didn't recognize the situation, and didn't give Harrison his chance at 2 more yards to reach 100. If I had a nickel for every time the Bears won a game against an AFC opponent that had never won the Super Bowl before, and did so convincingly, but afterwards, the head coach was upset because he denied his running back a chance at glory because he didn't understand the magnitude of the situation, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. because history has a funny way of repeating itself. And when Walter Payton and Mike Ditka were going through that after Super Bowl 20, you can bet that Abe Gibron and Jim Harrison, wherever they were watching, could absolutely relate. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.